I said keep your filthy hands off me! Valen froze at the sharp tone, fingers hovering just shy of the glimmering scales on her forearm. He hadn't meant to offend her. He hardly even knew what was going on. She'd collapsed in front of him less than a minute ago, her knees hitting the dusty floor of the abandoned hangar with a dull thud, and he'd instinctively rushed to her side. Yet the moment he'd reached for her, that hiss of a warning had sliced through the stale air and pinned him in place. His heart pounded. In the half-light of the overhead flickering beams, he could see her trembling, but she didn't look wounded in the way he'd first assumed. Her breathing was erratic, her pupils dilated. It was something else entirely, though he couldn't figure out what. He stood and backed away slowly, keeping both hands palms up to show he meant no harm. I'm sorry, he said, voice low. I thought I saw you fall. I just wanted to help. He squinted, trying to parse the subtle changes in her expression. She was unlike anyone he'd ever encountered, and as a pilot who'd hopped across star systems, he'd met a wide array of galactic travelers. But this woman, and clearly she was a woman, had an otherworldly glow about her that set every hair on his body on edge. Her eyes were a fierce violet, and the shimmering patterns along her cheeks pulsed with a faint bioluminescence. It was mesmerizing. Valen shook his head, telling himself to focus on the practical. She might be injured or sick. But the hostility in her gaze was unnerving. She blinked rapidly, as if trying to clear her mind. You have no right, she said, though the accusation faltered as her breath caught. Just stay back. Even as she said it, something like confusion flitted across her features. There was a moment, just a fraction of an instant, where she almost seemed disappointed he had withdrawn. He tried to maintain a respectful distance. He didn't want to anger her any more than he already had. But curiosity won out. Are you in pain? Do you need medical help? He stood in the middle of the old hangar, with no one else around to offer aid. This entire outpost was officially listed as abandoned, cut off from the trade routes after a catastrophic chemical spill a few years ago. He had only docked here to scavenge for parts for his battered vessel. He certainly hadn't expected to find anyone alive, let alone a luminous woman with a fierce stare. She pushed herself upright. Her posture was regal in a way, as though she'd been taught from birth never to cower, no matter how dire the circumstances. But she swayed on her feet, a sheen of sweat gathering along her forehead and temples. I am fine, she insisted, but her voice was betraying her, thick and husky with an undercurrent of strain. We do not need your assistance. We. The word struck him, and he glanced around warily, expecting to see others of her kind lurking in the gloom. The shadows stretched across rows of crumpled hulls and rusted cargo containers. Nothing moved, except the faint swirling dust in the artificial overhead light. Just the two of them. I don't see anyone else here, he said. Is someone with you? She didn't answer at first, her expression distant. Then, as if she suddenly remembered she should be outraged, she scowled. No. You misunderstand. It's not. She cut off, pressed her lips tight. With a frustrated breath, she started to walk away but staggered. He instinctively reached out, halting halfway, unsure if she even wanted him near. Though she didn't want to accept help, her knees nearly buckled again. Valen decided to risk it. He lunged forward, bracing her by the shoulders before she fell. She let out a low, trembling growl that sounded more distressed than threatening. Unhand me, she said. But this time, he noticed her fingers flexing, and for a second he wondered if she was gripping his jacket to keep herself upright. She was strong for someone who looked so slender, and even that brief contact seemed to jolt something in her. Her eyes fluttered and her scales brightened momentarily, casting a faint purplish glow on his arms. He wanted to be gentle, stepping away if she insisted, but she didn't actually push him off. Her breath hitched, and then something in her changed. It was as if her entire composure cracked. Her cheeks, a mixture of lavender and gold, darkened with a sudden flush. This isn't, I don't understand, she whispered, almost to herself, as though some internal wave of sensation was overwhelming her. Valen's mind raced. He remembered stories of certain alien species experiencing heightened states of biology, sometimes cyclical phenomena akin to an animal's heat, but he wasn't exactly well versed in xenobiology. He swallowed. "Are you sure you're all right?" he asked, more softly this time. "You seem, like you might be in some sort of distress." She didn't meet his eyes. "It's not a sickness," she said, frustration lacing her words. "But it's not something I can stop." Her body shuddered. That wave of pulsing luminescence across her scales was hypnotic. He resisted the urge to pull her closer. He had no idea if it was safe or wise to maintain contact. "Look," he said, summoning his calm pilot's tone. "My ship's not far from here. If you need somewhere to rest, or if there's some procedure you follow for this kind of—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Biological condition, I can at least provide a secure place. I'm not out to harm you." She kept her face lowered, but he saw her breathing accelerate. He risked gently sliding an arm around her waist, only enough to keep her steady. She didn't strike him or recoil, and that in itself was a silent sort of permission. "I can't believe this," she murmured, pressing her palm to her forehead. "I shouldn't be here. I was going to find a place away from any sentient." She stopped, exhaling. "But the arrival came too soon. Now I'm in the presence of a stranger, a human man, and everything is intensified." He had so many questions, yet he felt her tension coiled as tight as a spring. One wrong move might make her lash out or bolt, and in her current condition, that could be dangerous for her. "I promise I'm not going to hurt you," he said gently. "My name is Valen." He tried to keep his voice as steady as possible. "What's yours?" She closed her eyes for a moment, perhaps weighing whether to trust him with that information. Finally she said, "I am Marexa of the Kolari." Her voice dipped low again, rolling with a faint accent that made his name sound exotic on her tongue. "Marexa," he repeated. "Okay. Can you walk if I help you? My ship's just across that docking bay. It might have the supplies you need." Her gaze flicked to the door leading out of the hangar. The corridor was dim, lined with debris from the outpost's deserted halls. She nodded once, curtly. He slipped her arm around his shoulder, taking as much of her weight as he dared without overstepping. Together, they moved slowly across the old hangar, and every shuffle of their feet echoed in the emptiness around them. He couldn't help noticing how warm she felt, even through the tear in his jacket. It was almost like she was radiating heat from inside. The corridor's flickering lights cast long, shifting shadows, and the stale smell of disuse filled the air. They passed abandoned shops and rusted utility panels. Valen made sure to keep a steady pace, conscious of her quiet groans whenever she stepped awkwardly. Eventually, they reached the docking bay. His ship, the Horizon's Ransom, a battered mid-size freighter, rested at the far end of the bay, its engines cold, and its ramp lowered for easy salvage runs. He hoped it would still start after all the rummaging he'd done for spare parts. As they approached, Marexa's steps became unsteady again. She pressed closer to him, and the glowing patterns on her skin sparked brighter. She squeezed her eyes shut, an expression of desperate confusion on her face. "This is so humiliating," she whispered. She almost sagged against him, but at the last moment she forced herself upright. "I'm not used to these urges. It's a genetic anomaly in my family line. I'd normally sequester myself away from others. But I was too far from home." Valen's heart panged with sympathy he didn't quite understand. It must be difficult for her to be so vulnerable in front of a stranger. "You don't owe me an explanation," he said softly, "but I'd like to help. Let's get you inside." He led her up the ramp. The inside of the freighter was dimly lit by emergency lights. He'd powered down most systems to save energy while scavenging. The cargo hold was mostly empty, aside from a few crates and tools strewn about. He guided her toward a small seating ledge by the wall. "Can you sit?" he asked. She complied, biting her lip as though trying to contain a surge of sensation. He grabbed a thermal blanket from a nearby crate and draped it over her shoulders, noting again how her scales felt slightly damp with sweat. "I'll see if I can find anything that might help," Medicine, at least. Or water. She nodded, eyes distant. As he rummaged through his supplies, he heard her breathing deepen. Each exhale carried a soft, involuntary moan that he pretended not to notice, though it shot a streak of heat through his own veins. He told himself to keep it together. This was no ordinary situation. He found a container of water and turned back. "Here, sip this," he said, gently tilting it toward her. She took it with trembling hands, downing several gulps. Her eyes flicked up to his, momentarily bright with gratitude before that guarded look returned. He waited a beat. "Do you need a place to rest? The crew quarters are tight, but there's a bunk." Her shoulders quivered. She looked around, absorbing the metallic corridors of the ship. "I shouldn't accept your hospitality. You're a stranger." Another wave passed over her, and she grimaced. "But I can't travel. My body won't stabilize unless I." She cut herself off, color flooding her face, or at least the Kolari version of a blush. It deepened the purplish glow beneath her skin. He set the container aside. "You don't need to say anything more if it makes you uncomfortable." A moment of silence, heavy with anticipation, stretched between them. He realized they were very close, and she hadn't pulled away. He could feel the heat emanating from her, a living pulse that resonated in the air around them. She licked her lips nervously. "I do require skin contact," she admitted in a near whisper, as though that confession cost her whatever remained of her pride. "It's part of the cycle, the reason we seclude ourselves. The nerve endings become hypersensitive, the body demands physical closeness. Without it, there's a risk of delirium, or shutting down entirely." She blinked rapidly, trying to maintain composure. "I know it must sound insane to you." He swallowed, at a loss for words. She was right, it did sound insane, but in a galaxy filled with innumerable species, there's all manner of bizarre biology. "So you were in the hangar, looking for a place to hide?" he guessed. "And it hit you sooner than you expected?" She gave a small nod, drawing the blanket tighter. "Yes. I'd planned to barricade myself somewhere until it passed. It's never been this strong." She lowered her eyes to the deck. "Now you see why I was so angry when you tried to help. I didn't want to risk touching you. The more I come in contact with a being, the more the condition fixates on them." Her shoulders slumped in obvious shame. "This is humiliating. Especially to be at the mercy of a human. We haven't always had friendly dealings with your kind." Valen exhaled slowly. "I'm sorry if that's the case. But I'm not here to exploit you. If what you need is some form of contact so you don't die from this, then I'd rather do that than let you suffer. It's not like we have other options in an abandoned outpost. But I'm not trying to force you into anything." Her gaze flicked up, surprise laced with curiosity. "You would consent to that? Even though it's not your duty?" He felt a twinge of nervous heat at her phrasing. "It's not about duty," he said, voice gentle but firm. "You seem like you're in trouble. If I can help, I will. It's that simple." And yet, it wasn't that simple, because the moment they'd touched, he'd felt his own heart rate spike. There was something undeniably alluring about her. The luminous scales, the fierce vulnerability in her eyes, the way she moved, like a graceful predator, even in distress. Marexa released a slow, trembling breath. "All right then," she said. "But if it becomes too intense, tell me to stop. We don't know how your human physiology will respond to mine." It was the most direct acknowledgement of potential intimacy he'd heard from her, and it set his pulse thrumming with anticipation. She reached out tentatively, brushing her fingers against the back of his hand. The effect was immediate. A wave of warmth, almost electric, tingled through his skin. Her breath quickened, and a faint glow rippled across her cheekbones. She let out a soft sigh that sounded half relief, half tortured need. "It feels better," she whispered, "when you're near." His own nerves lit up in response. He tried to remain clinical, to think about her well-being, but the tension building between them was like a gravitational pull. "Then let's get you somewhere you can lie down," he managed. He stood, guiding her gently into the narrow corridor that led to the quarters. The bunk was Spartan, just a cot bolted to the wall, a worn blanket, and some overhead storage. She eased onto it, body shaking with each breath. He sat beside her, uncertain, letting her set the pace. Marexa bit her lip, eyes fluttering as she pressed the palm of her hand to his. Her scales were hot to the touch, and her luminous patterns surged brighter, intensifying her beauty in the dim cabin. "I apologize for my earlier hostility," she said, voice hushed. "We Kalari are taught to be self-sufficient in all things. Depending on an outsider is the last thing I ever wanted." He brushed aside a few strands of her sweat-damp hair from her forehead. "You don't have to explain," he replied. "I get it. I'm hardly in a position to judge. I've been alone for a while too." He felt her fingers tighten around his, and a flutter of excitement coursed through him. She made a small sound, half laugh, half scoff. "I must look pathetic." He shook his head, meeting her gaze. "You look alive. And very much still in control, despite what your body is doing." He paused, lowering his voice. "Let me know if you want me to stay or go." Her hand traveled up to his arm, tentatively exploring the shape of his bicep through the jacket. Her pupils were huge, glowing faintly with that violet luminescence. "Stay," she whispered. "But I warn you, it won't be easy." He swallowed, the weight of that invitation pressing on him. "All right," he said softly. "I'm staying." The next few hours were a blur of tension, half-formed conversation, and careful touches. She seemed to drink in every bit of contact he offered, his hand against her shoulder, his fingertips brushing hers, the occasional press of his palm against her cheek to soothe the tremors that racked her body. Each time their skin met, her luminous patterns flared, painting the walls of the small cabin in waves of shifting purple and gold. She would exhale shakily, as if relief flooded her system, only for a new wave of urgency to build moments later. Valen tried not to let his own reactions show too openly, but he couldn't deny how her proximity affected him. His heart hammered every time her gaze locked with his, and the undeniable sensuality of her need pressed against his resolve. She wasn't just physically striking, she was also fiercely proud, honest in her vulnerability, and wholly new in a galaxy that had jaded him. He found himself leaning in, wanting to ease her suffering but also drawn by curiosity and a strange desire. They spoke in hushed tones about inconsequential things, how she ended up on the abandoned outpost, how he'd survived countless salvage runs. She revealed she'd been on her way to a safe refuge in a nearby sector when her cycle hit too soon. In hushed confessions she admitted that her people, the Kalari, had once been persecuted by corporations seeking to exploit their natural bioluminescent properties for certain medical technologies. Marexa was the last of her clan line, a role that carried burdens she hardly explained. Valen shared a fragment of his own story, that he'd fallen out of favor with the big trade alliances and now scraped by doing unregistered cargo runs. He avoided the bigger ports where slavers and corporate enforcers ran rampant. As she grew more comfortable, Marexa curled against his side, seeking warmth and contact. Her arms slid around his waist. He let her cling to him. Occasionally, a moan escaped her when the pulses of her cycle peaked, but each time, she found relief in his presence. He tried to remain calm, but the soft brush of her scales against his skin was disarmingly intimate. A swirl of emotions, protectiveness, desire, caution, all warred within him. He kept reminding himself that her condition was temporary, that she might regret all of this once the intensity subsided. Eventually, the surges seemed to grow less frequent. Her breathing steadied, and her luminous patterns dimmed, resting in a gentle glow rather than the wild flares. She still pressed close, though, as if any gap between their bodies might rekindle her discomfort. "You're helping," she murmured drowsily. "Much more than I expected." He stroked her shoulder softly. "I'm glad." In truth, he was relieved, too, relieved that she'd found some stability, and relieved that he'd managed not to lose himself entirely in the feverish tension. "Are you tired?" She nodded, eyes half-lidded. "Exhausted. But the cycle doesn't let me sleep for long. I'll drift off, then the next wave will come. A faint edge of fear rimmed her voice, as if she dreaded facing it alone. I'll stay with you, Valen promised. If you don't mind sharing the bunk, I'll just keep an arm around you. That might help, right? She exhaled, a bit of tension leaving her shoulders. Yes. Thank you. The gratitude in her eyes made something twist in his chest. He wondered how many times she'd gone through this alone, or how many times she'd been forced to trust the wrong people. When she did fall asleep, it was only for brief stretches. In those moments, Valen listened to her soft breathing, felt the heat radiating from her scaled skin. He caught himself watching the subtle patterns on her cheeks, the gentle flicker of gold that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. He'd never been so captivated by another living being. The hum of the ship's systems was the only sound in the corridor beyond. Eventually she stirred, letting out a soft moan. He tightened his hold on her. It's all right, he soothed. You're safe. I've got you. Her gaze fluttered open, and for a fleeting moment, raw emotion passed between them. Her hands slid up his chest, exploring the contours of his body with hesitant curiosity, as if marveling at the difference between human and Kolari. Valen, she whispered, as if testing the name again. Your presence quiets the storm inside me. I didn't think that was possible. He swallowed hard, fighting the urge to lean in further. I'll do what I can. They remained in that tenuous space for hours more, drifting in and out of talk, half-sleep, and the gentle solace of each other's company. When she convulsed with another wave, he ran his hand along her back, letting her press her body to his. And each time she calmed, she seemed almost embarrassed by how personal it was becoming. For his part, Valen tried to maintain a respectful distance, but it was impossible not to feel the stirrings of desire. Their eyes met often, searching for answers neither could articulate. Eventually, fatigue weighed on them both. The cycle's pulses dulled, separated by longer intervals of calm. The sun, if it could be called that on this station, would be rising behind the clouds of pollutants outside the outpost soon. The artificial lights in the docking bay never changed much, but the old outpost had a battered day-night cycle somewhere in its systems. Valen made sure the door to the bunk was locked. He couldn't be certain if anyone else might stumble across them, though it seemed unlikely in such a forsaken place. Marex's voice, barely above a whisper, brushed against his ear as she nestled closer. Thank you, she said, a gentle sincerity coloring her words. I know how odd this situation must be for you, but you've been kind. Perhaps too kind. He smiled wryly in the dark. Sometimes we just have to trust a stranger, he said. It's better than the alternative. He paused, letting his hand rest lightly on her side. Are you going to be all right? A faint hesitation. I believe so, she replied. At least until the next wave. Her arms tightened around him. It's easier with you here. He felt a subtle shift in the air between them, an intimacy that went beyond mere physical necessity. He tried to keep his voice steady. Then I'll stay. We can figure out the next move in the morning. She breathed a small laugh, shaky but real. I'm not used to letting anyone see me like this, she confessed. I'm not sure how I'll repay you. You don't need to repay me, Valen said, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. The interplay of starlight from the porthole and her own bioluminescence cast a soft glow on her features. He felt an almost overwhelming urge to lean in and press his lips to the crest of her temple. Instead, he stroked her scaled cheek. Just focus on feeling better. She closed her eyes. That might take a while. He let out a gentle hum, adjusting so they both fit more comfortably on the narrow bunk. We have time. He stayed awake longer than he intended, keeping watch over her as her breathing eventually evened out. His own eyelids grew heavy, but some protective instinct made it hard to sleep. She was so alien to him, yet in this cramped bunk with her slender body molded against his, it felt inexplicably right. Some time later, exhaustion claimed him, and he drifted into a light doze, lulled by the rhythmic glow of her scales and the quiet hush of the ship's systems. He woke to find her stirring, her forehead damp, eyes bright with renewed urgency. This wave seemed gentler than the previous ones, but still insistent. Her nails bit into his shoulders through his shirt as she clung to him. "Valen," she breathed, voice laced with desperation. "I'm sorry, it's starting again." Without hesitation, he held her close, letting her press her face into his neck. Her breath was hot against his skin, her body trembling. He fought down a rush of his own reaction, desire, empathy, a deep primal urge to comfort. "I'm here," he whispered, pressing his palm to the small of her back. She made a soft sound of relief, and for a few moments, they just breathed together, letting the closeness soothe her. When the tremor passed, she didn't pull away. Instead, her lips hovered near his collarbone, sending a thrill through him. He closed his eyes for a beat, focusing on controlling his heartbeat. The tension between them was a living thing, a coil of mutual awareness that demanded acknowledgement. After a moment, Marexa gently drew back, eyes shining in the low light. "I know this is more than what you bargained for," she murmured. Her gaze dropped to his mouth, and a flash of longing rippled across her face. "I can sense your discomfort. And something else." He swallowed, caught. "You're not wrong," he admitted. "I'm feeling a lot of things right now. Concern mostly. And, well," his cheeks warmed, an odd shyness creeping in. "You're beautiful. I can't pretend I'm not affected by you." She gave a shaky smile. "I've never experienced the cycle with someone who wasn't Kolari. I didn't even know it was possible for another species to quell the surges like this. It's overwhelming. And confusing." His voice was quiet. "But does it hurt less?" She nodded slowly. "Yes, much less. It's almost as though your presence is harmonizing with my own energy. Maybe it's something about your physiology that resonates with me." She paused, her scaled fingers tracing an absent pattern on his chest. Her eyes flicked up to his. "I don't want to take advantage of you." He almost laughed. "I think we're well past that concern," he said gently. "You're not forcing me into anything. I'm still here because I want to be." He tried not to read too much into the swirl of emotion behind her eyes, but it tugged at him all the same. "I have nowhere else to go until I fix the ship anyway," he added, attempting to lighten the mood. "So maybe I'm taking advantage of having such a fascinating passenger aboard." She let out a soft chuckle, surprising both of them. "You're an odd human, Valen. Most I've encountered treat me like an object, either to fear or to exploit." He pressed his lips together in a small smile. "I've been treated like an object in my time too, if it's any consolation. It's not fun." She nodded, sobering. "Then maybe we have that in common." The cabin felt stifling in its intimacy, yet neither of them moved to break the closeness. The weight of unsaid desires lingered in the air. Valen thought he might go mad if he didn't do something with all the tension. But he had to be sure this was what she wanted, not just the effects of her cycle. "Marexa," he said quietly, "do you need more contact to stabilize, or do you think you can rest again?" She studied his face. "I think if I sleep now, I'd only wake in discomfort again." Her hand slid up to his jaw, gentle yet deliberate. "But if I stay awake, I might do something foolish." He exhaled, his own pulse quickening. "What's foolish?" he whispered, though he already had an idea. Her cheeks glowed, and the patterns on her scales brightened again. The roiling desire in her eyes made his stomach tighten. Slowly, she leaned in, testing his reaction. He didn't pull away. Their lips brushed, soft and tentative at first. She made a quiet sound in the back of her throat, and he felt her entire body tremble. The surge of warmth that enveloped them was dizzying. He answered by deepening the kiss, mindful of her fangs. He'd caught a glimpse of them earlier, slender and needle-like. But she moved her mouth with surprising gentleness, as though afraid to break him. Her scales sparkled with each beat of her heart. The space between them blurred into a haze of breath and heat. When they finally parted, both were gasping. Marexa let her forehead rest against his. "That was..." She laughed softly. "I didn't know humans tasted so sweet." He didn't know how to respond. He just smiled, chest heaving. "You taste like star fruit and lightning," he teased, which earned him a bright, startled laugh. Lightning? Is that a compliment? He grinned, eyes locked with hers. Absolutely. They shared a moment of mutual wonder, a silent awareness that they'd crossed a boundary from necessity into desire. It wasn't only about survival or the demands of her cycle anymore. Something genuine had sparked between them. The outpost outside was silent as the grave, the rest of the galaxy far away. In that cramped bunk, it felt like their own small world had begun to revolve around each other. She cradled his cheek, brushing her thumb lightly against the scruff of his jaw. He leaned into her touch, letting the warmth of her palm ground him. We should slow down, she breathed, as though reading the whirlwind in his eyes. But I don't know if I can. He kissed the inside of her wrist gently. Then we won't, he whispered, giving himself over to the moment. Their mouths met again, and this time there was no hesitation. The contact of skin on scaled skin felt electric. She shifted her body against his, a moan escaping her when they pressed closer. He let his hands roam her back, the ridges of her scales sending shivers through him. For a timeless stretch of minutes, or perhaps hours, they lost themselves in each other's nearness, exploring each other's shapes, sounds, and boundaries with careful curiosity. He was struck by how quickly they found a natural rhythm. Yes, the impetus was partly her cycle, but there was something more intimate in the way her hand cupped the nape of his neck or the way he whispered her name against her throat. A sense of genuine connection. Eventually, when the intensity threatened to overwhelm them both, they eased apart just enough to catch their breath, still tangled in each other's arms. She looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and confusion. You're really all right with this? She asked once more, as if needing constant reassurance. He tucked a strand of her dark, shimmering hair behind her ear. I am, he said honestly. I haven't wanted anything like this in a long time. He paused, letting his hand rest on her cheek. But I do want it. I want you, Marexa. The light in her eyes flickered with a tender glow. She pressed her palm to his. Then stay. It was a quiet, heartfelt plea. He wrapped his arm around her, drawing her close. The hush that settled over them was punctuated by soft breathing and the faint hum of the ship. They both knew the moment couldn't last forever. The cycle would run its course, they would eventually have to leave this outpost, and the harsh realities of the galaxy would close in again. But for this stolen night, they let all that fade into the periphery. They dozed together, stirring now and then when a fresh surge or a gentle ache called them to one another. Each time, their connection became more familiar, less fraught with awkwardness. Touch, conversation, a mixture of laughter and sighs. A deeper bond formed with each shared breath. By the time the first pale flicker of the outpost's automated daylight began to brighten the corners of the corridors, Marex's cycle had calmed to a manageable thrum. She no longer trembled or cried out, and her once wild luminescent patterns had settled into a soft, constant glow. When they finally rose from the bunk, stiff from hours in close quarters, she winced a little, pressing a hand to her side. I'm still sore, she confessed, but nowhere near as bad. Your presence truly helped me. He nodded, stretching his arms overhead. Maybe there's some reciprocal effect. I feel better than I have in months. Lighter. She tilted her head, regarding him with a fond curiosity. You do look more at ease. Then she rubbed the back of her neck, a hint of embarrassment creeping in. So what happens now? He considered that question. Well, I came here to scavenge a new coil from my engine. The current one is nearly fried. If we can find a functioning coil on this station, I can get the ship running. Then we can leave this place, figure out how to get you home or wherever you're headed. She nodded slowly. Yes, I need to continue to my original destination. Though, perhaps there's no rush. My clan was scattered. I was trying to regroup with the few that survived the corporate raids. But it's possible they've already moved on. There was a raw sadness beneath her words. Valen reached out, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We can look for them together, if that's what you want. Or if you'd rather find a safer place to ride out the aftermath of this cycle, we could do that too. I'm not exactly tied to any obligations. She placed her scaled hand over his. I appreciate that. Truly. She took a breath, squaring her shoulders with a fraction of her former regality. First, let's see about that coil. I'd like to regain my strength, and maybe some fresh air. She paused, glancing toward the sealed bulkhead. Or what's left of it in this toxic environment. Well, we'll just see what we can do. They decided to search the outpost systematically. Marexa insisted she was strong enough to walk on her own, though Valen kept close, ready to catch her if she stumbled. She moved more steadily now, though a subtle tension lingered in the way she held herself, as if wary of a surprise spike of her condition. The deserted corridors were still and silent, except for the distant hum of failing power systems. They passed half-collapsed corridors where the overhead lights flickered ominously. The signage was partially burned away or defaced, but Valen's memory of the station's layout guided them toward a small workshop that might have the part they needed. They moved cautiously, weapons at the ready, in case the outpost had gained any new, unfriendly residents. At one point, Marexa paused near a shattered window that overlooked the planet's surface. Beyond the glass, thick clouds of swirling brown dust glowed faintly under a wan sun. She pressed her palm against the cracked pane. I can feel the planet's sadness, she murmured. As if it mourns the people who once lived here. Valen joined her, placing his hand near hers without quite touching. It's tragic, he agreed. Greedy corporations came in, ravaged its resources, and left. Everyone else either fled or got sick from the contamination. It's a ghost station now. She turned to him, her gaze reflecting that faint sadness. A ghost station that sheltered me at my most vulnerable. And led me to you. He offered a small, warm smile. Guess the place isn't a total lost cause then. They pressed on until they found the workshop. The door was locked, but Valen managed to bypass the simple security panel with a bit of fiddling. The lights inside flickered weakly, revealing rows of metal shelving, crates filled with spare parts, and a greasy workbench. They combed through the scattered debris, rummaging for anything resembling an engine coil. Eventually, Valen spotted a crate in the corner marked with a faded shipping label that mentioned Starship components. He pried it open, and to his relief, found exactly what he was searching for. Got it, he said, holding the coil up triumphantly. It was older than he would have liked, but it might do the trick. Marexa eyed it, expression thoughtful. That means we can leave soon, doesn't it? Her voice held an undercurrent of uncertainty, as though the prospect of leaving him felt more unsettling than she'd expected. He tried to keep his tone neutral. We can. If that's what you want. Or we can stay a while longer, if you need to recover more. He set the coil aside, stepping closer to her. Your cycle, is it going to flare up again? She exhaled, closing her eyes for a moment. Potentially, yes. It's usually strongest for the first day or two, then it tapers off over the course of a week. But you're helping to temper it. If we parted now, I'd have a much harder time. She met his gaze, a spark of vulnerability in her eyes. But I don't want you to feel obligated to remain at my side out of pity. He slid a hand around her waist carefully. She leaned into him, letting out a soft sigh that sounded like relief. It's not pity, he said. It's my choice. I'm here because I want to be, and because maybe, just maybe, I don't mind having you around. Her lips curved into a faint smile. Is that so? He gave her a playful shrug. We all need companions in this messy galaxy. Especially ones as capable, and beautiful, as you. He felt her heartbeat quicken under his hand, and she dipped her head shyly, which surprised him given her earlier fierceness. It was another glimpse of the complexities within her. They decided to return to the ship. On the way, they navigated a collapsed corridor where a large chunk of ceiling had caved in. A tangle of wires and metal beams forced them to squeeze through a narrow gap. Marexa went first, slipping gracefully under a twisted beam. He followed, bracing the overhead debris with his shoulder. Just as he made it through, the structure groaned ominously. Careful, Marexa said, but he was already jerking back, trying to keep the beam from crashing down. It came loose with a grinding screech. He managed to jump clear, but it came perilously close to landing on her. Without hesitation, he grabbed her arm, pulling her forward. They tumbled together in a heap on the dusty floor as the beams slammed behind them with a reverberating clang. "Are you all right?" Valen asked, breathless, heart hammering. She raised herself on her forearms, her hair falling around her glowing cheeks. "Yes," she managed, voice trembling slightly. "You saved me." Her wide eyes mirrored a swirl of fear and gratitude. Valen reached up, brushing dust from her face. "Guess I did," he said, trying to grin through his own rattled nerves. "Glad you didn't get flattened." She laughed shakily, then sank down against him for a moment, letting the adrenaline wash over them both. Her body was lithe and strong, pressing against his chest, and the moment lingered, charged with an undertone of renewed awareness. He realized how intimately they were lying, her knee between his legs, her scaled arms braced on either side of his shoulders. A fresh flicker of her glow pulsed through her skin. "I should get up," she murmured, though her cheeks tinted with that violet flush. He inhaled, feeling her breath warm against his lips. "Yeah, probably," he said, but neither of them moved. For a few heartbeats, they just stared at each other. Then, with a soft, impulsive urgency, she leaned in and kissed him again. He returned it without hesitation, pouring in the leftover adrenaline and relief from the near disaster. The taste of her was a rush, and she released a small, needy sound that made his blood surge. He deepened the kiss, wrapping an arm around her waist, and the press of their bodies became a heady reminder of the night they'd spent wrapped in each other's arms. Finally, she broke away, gasping. "We can't do this in the middle of a collapsing corridor," she managed, voice shaking with barely contained laughter and something more. He nodded, breathing hard. "Right. Let's go." They extracted themselves from the wreckage, shaking off dust. The corridor behind them was impassable now, so they found another route, eventually emerging into a musty hallway that led back to the docking bay. Valen was relieved to see his ship still undisturbed, ramp lowered just as they'd left it. Once inside, he set about installing the new coil. Marexa stayed close, handing him tools and studying the ship's layout with a curious eye. Occasionally, she'd have a minor flutter of her cycle, and he'd pause to let her lean against him until the sensation passed. Each time, she apologized for the interruption, but he shook his head. "No need for apologies," he insisted, pressing a light kiss to her temple. "I'm here for you." Her expression held gratitude and something deeper each time he reaffirmed that stance. She seemed unused to unwavering support. As the hours ticked by, she told him more about her people's plight, the way corporate forces had discovered that the Kolari's natural bioluminescence contained enzymes that could be synthesized into high-value pharmaceuticals. They'd enslaved entire colonies, tested them in labs, and many Kolari had died under brutal experiments. A small rebellion eventually freed some survivors, but the diaspora scattered them across the galaxy. Now, Marexa was trying to track down her last surviving kin. Valen listened with a heavy heart. He'd witnessed corporate atrocities on other worlds, but hearing it firsthand from her perspective struck a raw chord. "No wonder you prefer solitude," he murmured as he tightened a bolt on the coil. "Trust must be hard to come by." She shrugged, a sad acceptance in her eyes. "Yes. But perhaps I'm learning to trust again." She laid a hand on his shoulder, letting that gesture speak volumes. When the coil was finally in place, Valen ran a diagnostic from the cockpit. The engines hummed to life, albeit with a few sputters. "Looks like we're operational," he said, relief washing over him. "We can leave whenever we're ready." Marexa appeared behind him, arms folded, her luminescent stripes shifting gently with her breath. "You said we," she noted quietly. He turned, meeting her gaze. "I did," he confirmed, crossing the small cockpit to stand before her. "I'd like you to come with me. We can figure out your next steps, and maybe, along the way, I'd get some company that's a little more interesting than the usual salvage junk." She arched a brow. "You're certain you can handle me?" It was half teasing, half serious, laced with a flicker of insecurity. Valen scoffed softly, then closed the distance, resting his hands lightly on her hips. "I think I'm up for the challenge," he said, voice warm. "If you'll have me." She let out a slow breath, as if letting go of an internal weight. Her scales glowed brighter, a visual representation of her emotion. "I'd like that," she said softly, and the sincerity in her eyes stirred something deep inside him. She placed a hand gently on his chest, right over his heart. "I trust you, Valen." He covered her hand with his own. "Then it's settled. Let's power this place down and get out of here." She nodded, a small smile tracing her lips. That moment felt like the start of something more than just a partnership of convenience. They set to work preparing the ship for departure, stowing away tools and verifying that the airlocks were sealed. Before long, the Horizon's ransom rose from the docking bay floor on thrusters, the gravitational field of the station releasing them to the vacuum of space. As they broke free, Marexa stood at the cockpit window, her gaze fixed on the swirling dust clouds that shrouded the planet below. "Goodbye, place of ghosts," she whispered. "You served your purpose." She turned to Valen, who was making minute adjustments to the controls. "So, where to now?" He gave her a confident, if slightly mischievous grin. "Wherever we want. I've got a few contacts I can check if you want to locate your people, or we can just keep drifting until we come up with a plan. Either way, I'm in no rush." She studied him, a contemplative look in her violet eyes. Then she smiled, the glow in her scales softening to a gentle pulse. "Let's chart a course for the nearest unmonitored trade hub. See if we can pick up any rumors about remaining Kolari settlements. I won't rest until I know whether they're safe." He nodded, inputting coordinates into the NAV console. "Nearest unmonitored hub is about 3 days out, if we take the sublane route. Less chance of running into corporate patrols that way." "Good," she said. "And if we run into trouble?" He threw her a wink. "I have a feeling we can handle it together." She settled into the co-pilot's seat, curiosity lighting her face as she examined the controls. Her presence filled the small cockpit with a comforting warmth. For a moment, Valen let himself appreciate the surreal turn his life had taken. Less than a day ago, he'd been scouring a derelict station for parts, expecting to leave alone as usual. Now, here he was with a luminous Kolari woman who had awakened feelings in him he'd long assumed were dead. As if sensing his thoughts, she reached out and placed a scaled hand on his. The simple gesture of reassurance made his chest tighten. He laced his fingers with hers. Together they watched the swirl of starlight passing by as the Horizon's ransom accelerated away from the husk of the station. The first day in transit passed uneventfully. Marexa took the time to explore the cramped interior of the ship. She marveled at human technology, though she insisted much of it was less elegant than Kolari systems. Valen teased her about that, joking that perhaps she'd teach him a thing or two about elegance, once they found a proper docking station. In return, she teased him about his lack of organization, pointing out the random clutter that seemed to sprout in every corner of the cargo hold. They fell into an easy rhythm. When a wave of her cycle returned, it was milder, but still potent enough that she sought out his arms, pressing her face against his neck. He would hold her until the tension subsided, or sometimes distract her with playful banter. There were more kisses too, stolen in the corridor or the cockpit when the beep of the navigational console signaled another course adjustment. Over shared ration meals, they exchanged stories of survival. Valen told her about near misses with pirate ships, black market deals gone wrong, and nights spent sleeping in engine compartments to hide from bounty hunters. She told him about her upbringing on a lush Kolari colony world, where the night air glowed with the combined bioluminescence of her people. It sounded like a dream, and he hated that it had been torn from her. In quieter moments, he caught her studying him with an intensity that was both flattering and disconcerting. She seemed fascinated by human expressions of emotion, especially the ones he couldn't hide. One evening, while they lounged in the cargo hold, Marexa placed her hand over his heart again. "Why does it beat so fast whenever I touch you here?" she asked. He found himself at a loss for words. "It's just how we react to someone we're attracted to, I guess." She tilted her head, her luminous eyes narrowing. "Attraction. That's more than just you helping me survive my cycle, isn't it?" He swallowed, nodding slowly. "Yeah. A lot more." She let out a soft breath, studying the way he blushed under her scrutiny. Then she leaned in, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that was tentative yet electrifying. When she pulled back, her voice was gentle. I feel it too, Valen. It's not just the cycle. It's you. Those words echoed in him long after she retired to the bunk that night. They were forging a connection that felt deeper than circumstance. Yet he wasn't naive enough to think it would be smooth sailing ahead. The galaxy had a habit of interfering, especially when something good was just beginning. Sure enough, on the second day of their journey, the sensors picked up an anomaly in their flight path. Valen was dozing in the cockpit when a shrill beep jolted him upright. He rubbed his eyes and scanned the readouts. Damn it, he muttered. Marexa, get up here. Within moments she appeared behind him, hair tousled from sleep. What is it? There's a ship on intercept course, he said. No ID signature. Could be pirates, slavers, or corporate. None of those are good options. He punched a few buttons, trying to calculate a faster route away. But the unidentified vessel was quick. It closed distance at an alarming rate. Marex's eyes flicked to the screen. We should prepare for the worst, she said, her voice sober. If it's a corporation looking for Kolari, we can't let them board. They won't hesitate to take me. Valen's jaw tightened. Not happening, he growled. Nobody's taking you anywhere. He checked the ship's weapons. The Horizon's ransom was equipped for basic self-defense, but it wasn't a combat vessel. We might have to outrun them. He keyed in a series of evasive maneuvers, hoping they'd slip away before the unknown craft could lock onto them. The engines roared, still not at peak efficiency, but enough to give them a fighting chance. At first, it seemed they might succeed. The distance reading wavered. But then the sensors showed a sudden spike in the pursuer's acceleration. They're boosting power, Valen cursed under his breath. Marexa gripped the back of his seat. We can't jump to hyperspace in a hurry, can we? He shook his head. Not until we clear the gravity well of that dwarf star system. Another hour at least. The console flashed warnings as the trailing vessel locked weapons. Brace yourself. A jolt rocked the ship. The lights flickered as the ransom took a glancing shot from a plasma cannon. Marexa clenched her jaw. We can't sustain many hits like that. Hang on, Valen said, leading the ship through a field of drifting debris from some long-forgotten battle. Metal shards and wreckage littered the sublane. He hoped that ducking behind the debris might disrupt the pursuers' targeting scanners. The tactic bought them some time. The second shot flew wide, striking a twisted hunk of metal instead of their hull. They zigzagged, straining the engines to the limit. Sweat beaded on Valen's brow. Marexa kept one eye on the sensors, calling out warnings. Another volley from the hostile ship whooshed by, missing them by meters. The console let out a shrill alert as the engine heat levels climbed dangerously high. Come on, Valen muttered, coaxing the ransom forward. He saw the swirling edge of the gravitational distortion that prevented them from making a jump. If they could just cross that threshold. They're charging up for another shot, Marexa said urgently. A bright flash of light erupted behind them. The ship lurched, sparks flew from a console, and Valen nearly lost control as the freighter spun wildly. He wrestled with the joystick, leveling the craft. We lost the starboard stabilizer, he snarled, checking the damage readouts. We can't keep this up. Marex's gaze flicked between him and the swirling starfield outside. If we get away, we can fix it. Just get us to jump range. She slammed a fist against the console in frustration. Another alarm blared, indicating a rising temperature in the coil they'd just installed. I'm pushing everything to the limit, Valen said through gritted teeth. We only need a few more minutes. Suddenly, a new beep sounded. Marexa frowned. Multiple signals inbound. She recalibrated the scanner. 2 more ships just dropped out of FTL. This is bad. Valen's heart sank, but then Marexa let out a puzzled gasp. They're firing on the hostile ship. He stared at the readout in disbelief. Sure enough, the new arrivals had targeted their pursuer, engaging them in a surprise skirmish. Who the hell? he began. Pirates warring among themselves? Marexa suggested. Or, her voice caught. Could it be Kalari? Allies? Valen squinted at the readouts. The newcomers didn't match corporate or known pirate profiles. One of them had a faintly recognizable transponder code. The frequency was reminiscent of old Kalari signals he'd read about in salvage logs. It might be your people, he realized. The hostile ship, outgunned by the two new arrivals, began to retreat. It fired a parting shot toward the horizon's ransom, but the shot went wide. Then it engaged full thrust, vanishing into the darkness of space. The two unidentified ships didn't pursue. Instead, they hung back, scanning Valen's battered freighter. Valen slumped in the cockpit seat, adrenaline fading. We survived, he said, half in disbelief. Marexa nodded, eyes locked on the sensors. Yes. Now we find out who saved us, and why. A communication request pinged on the console. Valen accepted it warily. A holographic visage flickered to life above the console, a tall figure with scaled features resembling Marexa's, though older, wearing elaborate garb. We detected your distress signal, the figure said in a measured tone. Are you in need of assistance? Marexa inhaled sharply, stepping forward into the calm's field of view. Yes, she said, voice wavering slightly. I am Marexa of the Kalari clan, seeking refuge. A stunned silence. Then the older Kalari's eyes widened. Marexa? By the ancient stars, is it truly you? A swirl of emotion passed across Marexa's face. I thought I'd never find you, she whispered, her eyes shining. I was told everyone scattered. I've been searching. The older Kalari nodded. We have a small enclave hidden away, safe from corporate clutches. We roam between star systems, but news reached us of your possible survival. We came as soon as we detected Kalari life signs in this sector. And we arrived just in time, it seems. Valen watched this exchange with awe and a pinch of trepidation. Marexa had found her people. So soon. A swirl of conflicting feelings churned in him. He was glad she was safe, that she had a place to call home. But what did that mean for them? The older Kalari's gaze flicked to Valen. Who is this human with you? He asked, not unkindly but with a wary curiosity. Marexa laid a hand on Valen's shoulder, as though offering him comfort or declaring an alliance. This is Valen. He saved me, helped me through my cycle. I owe him my life. A low murmur spread among the other Kalari in the background, but the older one inclined his head. Then we owe him our gratitude. If you wish, Marexa, you can join us now. We'll escort you to our convoy. See to your health. She hesitated, glancing at Valen. Her hand tightened on his shoulder. I'd like that, she began, her voice trembling slightly. But I don't want to leave him behind. He's become important to me. Valen's heart did a small flip at the admission. The older Kalari studied them both. We do not harm those who have aided our kin. If he is your chosen companion, he may come as well. Though we cannot guarantee the acceptance of all within our clan, we will do our best to welcome him. Our ways are not always human ways. Marexa exhaled a breath of relief, turning to Valen. Will you come with me? He felt a surge of emotion. I will if that's what you want, he said quietly. I don't want to stand in the way of your reunion, but I also don't want to lose you. Her eyes glowed, shimmering with unshed tears. She grasped his hand. I want you by my side. Let us see if my people are ready to welcome a human who saved one of their own. A faint smile tugged at Valen's lips. I'd be honored. The older Kalari nodded solemnly. Very well. We'll transmit coordinates for a safe rendezvous. Follow us closely. Our enclaves are hidden, and we must ensure they remain so. And just like that, the comm link ended. Marexa let out a shaky laugh, half joyful, half apprehensive. I can't believe it, she murmured. I found them. After all this time. Valen squeezed her hand. And you're not alone now. She leaned into him, pressing her forehead to his. No, I'm not. A moment lingered between them, filled with unspoken feelings. Then, with a resolute nod, she turned to the console. Let's follow them. Valen piloted the Horizon's ransom behind the two Kolari ships, his nerves dancing between excitement and a strange sense of dread. Would her people truly accept a human in their midst, especially one so entwined with Marex's cycle? He scanned her face, searching for reassurance. She offered him a brave, hopeful smile that made his heart flutter. Within the hour, they approached a swirling nebula near the outskirts of a star system. The shifting clouds of cosmic dust concealed what appeared to be a small convoy of ships, a hidden sanctuary. The two Kolari vessels guided them to a docking station rigged onto an asteroid within the nebula. Camouflaged from corporate scans, it was the perfect hideout. Docking procedures were swift. As soon as they landed, Marexa and Valen were greeted by a small delegation of Kolari. Their scaled skin and bioluminescent patterns varied in hue, some purple like Marexa's, others tinged with green or blue. The older Kolari from the hollow transmission stepped forward, robes swaying gently around him. His name, they learned, was Aratek. He held himself with a dignified grace. Marexa, Aratek said softly, extending his arms in a traditional Kolari greeting. She stepped into his embrace without hesitation, letting out a small, choked sob. The onlookers whispered among themselves, some stepping forward to greet her, others hanging back with curiosity. Valen waited, unsure of protocol. He felt like an outsider, even though he'd become so entwined with Marex's life. Eventually, Aratek turned to him, solemn. You have risked much to protect one of our own, he said. For that, you have my thanks. We Kolari do not forget debts of honor. Valen inclined his head. I care about her. I'm just glad I could help. Marexa clung to Valen's arm, as if to show the others their connection. Some looked on with acceptance, others with thinly veiled distrust. One younger Kolari woman with shimmering teal scales approached, curiosity lighting her eyes. How did he manage to calm your cycle? She asked Marexa. It's rare for a non-Kolari to have such an effect. A faint blush tinted Marexa's cheeks. He was kind, she said simply, not delving into details. Her eyes flicked to Valen with warmth that made his chest tighten. The teal-scaled woman seemed to glean enough from that look, because she smiled softly and nodded, stepping back to give them space. They were ushered into a large gathering chamber carved out of the asteroid itself. It was both rustic and elegant, with Kolari script etched into the walls and glowing orbs providing soft light. Others filed in, forming a loose circle around Marexa and Valen. Aratek stood at the center, addressing everyone. Marexa has returned to us in the midst of a great diaspora, he said. We have lost many, but we stand together to rebuild. Now she brings a human, one who protected her during her most vulnerable time. He gestured to Valen, who tried not to look too self-conscious. He claims no ties to corporate powers or slavers, and Marexa vouches for him. A low murmur spread among the gathered Kolari. Some nodded in acceptance, others frowned. Finally, an elderly female Kolari with deep blue scales stepped forward. Marexa, child, you have always followed your instincts. We must trust your judgment. If you say this human is worthy, then we will watch and decide for ourselves. That is the Kolari way. Marexa inclined her head respectfully. Thank you. Aratek turned to Valen. We cannot promise immediate friendship from all, but if you wish to dwell among us for a time, to assist Marexa in her search for scattered kin, we will grant you passage and protection. But betray us, and there will be consequences. Valen swallowed, nodding firmly. I understand. I have no intention of betraying anyone. I just want to help. Aratek offered a small bow of acknowledgement. Then welcome. He clapped his hands, and the onlookers began to disperse, some whispering, others offering subdued greetings to Marexa as they moved to exit. Valen stood there, somewhat overwhelmed. Marexa touched his shoulder gently. You did well, she murmured. They don't trust easily, but they haven't cast you out. That means something. He exhaled a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. That's good, I guess. He looked around. This place is incredible. So this is where your people hide from corporate slavers? She nodded, sadness tempered by relief. Yes, for now. We move often. We use these asteroids and the cover of nebulas to stay hidden. We gather resources, search for others like us, and then drift on before we can be found. He gave her a reassuring smile. Then let's help them, any way we can. If that means ferrying supplies or checking star charts for possible Kalari settlements, I'm up for it. A spark of gratitude lit her eyes. Thank you? She hesitated, then leaned in, pressing a gentle kiss to his cheek. I'm glad you stayed with me. He felt the warmth of her lips linger on his skin. Me too, he said quietly. They spent the next several days acclimating to life among the roaming Kolari. Valen discovered that they had adapted advanced stealth technologies to avoid detection, but resources were always limited. He helped wherever he could, repairing small craft, using his knowledge of trade routes to recommend safe passages, and bartering for supplies under the table. Some Kolari warmed to him quickly, grateful for his practical help. Others viewed him with suspicion, uncertain about an outsider privy to their hideouts. Marexa reunited with old friends, weeping with relief at finding them alive. She shared stories of her struggles and how Valen had become her unexpected savior. Each retelling seemed to deepen her affection for him, though they rarely had the time to be alone as they'd been on the freighter. Here, she was constantly called away to meetings, or ceremonies, or planning sessions about the future of their people. He noticed that her cycle seemed to have finally receded, leaving her with a steady glow instead of the fevered surges. Yet the spark between them hadn't diminished. If anything, it had become more pronounced now that they weren't forced together by necessity. He found himself craving her presence, watching the way she moved with such grace through the corridors of the asteroid base, or how her laugh would ring out when she shared a private joke with him. Sometimes he'd catch her gaze across the busy hall, and the unmistakable heat in her eyes stirred an echo of the night they'd first truly touched. One evening, after a long day of labor, Valen was invited to join a communal feast in the main chamber. The Kolari spread out bowls of strange, luminescent fungi and carefully rationed meats from local creatures. He was still getting used to the taste, but he was grateful for their hospitality. Aratek gave a brief speech, highlighting the arrival of Marexa and the unexpected help of her human companion. It concluded with a hopeful message about unity. Marexa approached him afterward, leading him by the hand out of the main chamber. They ended up in a quieter corridor, where the glow of the luminous lines in the walls cast gentle patterns across her face. "Walk with me?" she asked, voice soft. He nodded, and they strolled through the winding passageways until they reached an observation deck carved near the asteroid's surface. A transparent barrier allowed a view of the swirling nebula outside. Rainbow clouds of cosmic dust shimmered, occasionally illuminated by distant stars. It was breathtaking. She stopped in front of the barrier, pressing her hand to it. "I used to dream about coming back to my people," she said quietly. "I feared they'd be gone, or that I'd be alone forever. Now here I am, and it feels both comforting and strange. There's so much to rebuild, so much pain still unresolved." Valen stepped closer, resting his hand on her waist. He sensed the tension coiled in her body. "You've been through so much. You don't have to fix it all in a day. Just be there for them, do what you can." She leaned her head against his shoulder, exhaling. "I know. It's just, some want revenge on the corporations, others want to remain hidden forever. I'm torn about how best to help. I was never a leader. My role was always to stand guard over our spiritual shrines, to protect the knowledge of our ancestral lines. Now those shrines are gone, and I'm out of place." He slipped his arm around her, pulling her gently against him. "Maybe you're not out of place, just forging a new one. And you have them. And you have me, if that's something you still want." She turned her face up to his, eyes reflecting the nebula's glow. "It is," she whispered, sliding her hands up his chest. "I do want that." He leaned down, kissing her softly. She sighed against his lips, tension melting away as she pressed closer. The hum of the nebula beyond them filled the silence, and for a moment they lost themselves in each other. Her taste brought back memories of their first frantic nights together on the ship. Now it was calmer, more deliberate, but no less intense. When they broke apart, she pressed her forehead to his, breath trembling. "I need you," she confessed in a half-whisper, echoing the longing that had been building since they'd arrived. "Not just to help me through a cycle, but because you make me feel seen. Safe." His heart stuttered at the quiet admission. "I feel the same," he murmured. "You found me in that station. Or maybe I found you. Either way, I'm not letting you go now." Her eyes shimmered, and she nodded, reaching for his hand. She guided him down another corridor to a secluded chamber, smaller than the main ones, but lined with what looked like seats and a central platform. "This was once a meditative room," she explained, voice hushed. "We used it to commune with the cosmic energies that passed through the nebula." Valen glanced around curiously. Soft lights pulsated in geometric patterns along the walls, reminiscent of Kolari script. A subtle hum filled the air, as though the asteroid's electromagnetic field resonated here. She guided him to the center of the room, her grip firm yet gentle. She turned to him, luminous eyes flickering with anticipation. "I want to share this with you," she said. "A piece of my culture." He swallowed, feeling the tension in the air. "I'm honored." Her hands rose to trace the lines of his face, pausing on his lips, then along his jaw. She whispered a few words in the Kolari tongue. He didn't understand them, but the tone was reverent. Then she stepped closer, sliding her arms around his neck, pressing their bodies together. He responded in kind, resting his hands on her waist, drawing her close. For a moment, they just stood there, breathing in tandem. The lights along the walls flickered, and he felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere, like a gentle, pulsing wave that made the hair on his arms stand on end. She tilted her head back, eyes closed, letting the hum flow through her. Then her gaze snapped open, meeting his with an intensity that made his pulse quicken. She guided his hand to her collar, where the edges of her scaled clothing parted, revealing more of her glowing skin. "Touch me," she whispered, voice trembling with both desire and nerves. "I want to feel you against me, not out of necessity, but out of choice." He nodded, heart pounding. The memory of their heated encounters on the ship surged back, but this felt different, deeper, threaded with genuine affection and a sense of belonging. Gently, he traced the edge of her clothing, sliding it aside to expose more of her luminescent body. She sucked in a breath, leaning into his touch, her own hands slipping under his shirt to caress the warmth of his skin. Their kisses became slow and exploratory, laden with the knowledge of each other's boundaries and the desire to push them further. In the hush of that chamber, they let the swirling nebula's energy cradle them as they shed the layers separating them. Each new patch of skin, each scale revealed, became a discovery that sent sparks through their bodies. Her glowing patterns flared whenever his lips grazed her neck or shoulder, and she returned the favor by pressing soft, insistent kisses to his chest and throat. He cradled her face, feeling the ridges of her scales against his palms. The luminous lines on her cheeks intensified, responding to his affection like a living tapestry. She moaned softly, fingers threading through his hair. Their breathing synchronized, each exhale a promise of closeness and trust. They sank to the floor, the hum of the chamber surrounding them. Soft words were exchanged, half in Kolari, half in Basic, but the meaning was clear in every breathless pause. They wanted this, they wanted each other, and they were safe here. Their bodies met in a slow dance, exploring shapes and textures. The heat of her skin, the softness of her scales, the curve of her waist under his hands, he drank it all in with reverence. She let out quiet, shuddering gasps whenever his touch or kisses found a particularly sensitive spot. Time seemed to stretch, lost in a haze of shared need. Their closeness felt like the final melding of two souls that had been seeking each other across the void. The sharp edges of tension, fear, and uncertainty dissolved, leaving only the raw truth of two beings giving themselves to each other. Her gentle cries spurred him on, and he answered with murmurs of her name, pressing lips to her temple, her cheeks, her mouth. When the peak of that longing finally crested, she clung to him, face buried in his neck, luminous patterns pulsing in a crescendo of gold and violet. He held her through it, heart pounding in his chest, his own voice shaky with the overwhelming sensation. Together, they rode that wave until it ebbed, leaving them trembling and breathless in each other's arms on the cool, pulsing floor of the chamber. Long moments passed in stillness. He stroked her hair, her scales, marveling at how fragile and fierce she felt all at once. She let out a contented sigh, pressing a gentle kiss to his collarbone. "Thank you," she breathed, voice cracked with emotion. "For coming with me, for caring for me, for everything." He tucked her against his chest, eyes burning with unshed tears of his own. "I should be thanking you," he whispered. "You've changed my life, Marexa. I don't know what's next, but I know I want to face it with you." She nuzzled into him, the glow of her scales settling into a rhythmic pulse that matched the distant stars outside. "Then we will," she promised, her voice soft. "Together." They lay there, entwined, letting the cosmic hum of the asteroid lull them into a state of peaceful exhaustion. They could almost feel the souls of the Kolari around them, the silent acceptance of their bond. Even if some might disapprove, it no longer mattered in that moment. They had found a place to begin anew, forging a future for themselves amidst the rubble and the stars. In the following weeks, Valen and Marexa settled into a new routine within the Kolari enclave. They discovered that many Kolari were interested in re-establishing lost trade connections on their own terms, safe passages to gather resources for survival, without falling under corporate tyranny. Valen's experience in the seedier parts of the galaxy proved invaluable. He negotiated discreet deals, using his contacts to source supplies that would keep the enclave independent. He taught some of the younger Kolari how to pilot small ships for scouting missions, though none picked it up quite as quickly as Marexa. She seemed to bloom in this environment now that her cycle had passed. Freed from the debilitating grip of her condition, she threw herself into rebuilding efforts, working side by side with her fellow Kolari to create a stable community. Yet she remained fiercely independent, refusing to let old traditions confine her. More than once, Valen found her confronting conservative elders who believed contact with humans was dangerous. She spoke passionately of how he'd saved her, how they'd formed a bond of mutual respect and care. A few naysayers grumbled, but they were largely overshadowed by those grateful for the new possibilities he represented. One evening, after a long day of helping to retrofit an old cargo vessel for Kolari use, Valen approached Marexa in the corridor outside their shared quarters. She wore simple Kolari garb, dyed a soft purple that complemented her scales. The glow of her cheeks brightened when she saw him. "Hey!" she greeted softly, stepping closer. He leaned in for a light kiss on her temple. "Hey! You looked incredible out there today, wielding that plasma torch like a pro." She grinned. "I'm just trying to keep up with you. I never thought I'd be patching holes in the middle of an asteroid, but here we are." She laced her fingers with his, something that still felt thrillingly natural. "Eritech wants us to join a scouting mission tomorrow. There's a rumor of another pocket of Kolari living in the outer belt. We might need your negotiation skills if we find them." He nodded, heart warming at the idea of traveling by her side again, forging new alliances. "Count me in. This is starting to feel like home, in a way." "I can't believe it." She studied his face. "Do you miss the horizon you used to chase?" He shrugged, a thoughtful smile curling his lips. "I've spent so long drifting from station to station, never really belonging anywhere. I guess it feels good to belong for once. With you." Her gaze softened, scales shimmering in the corridor light. She raised his hand to her lips, pressing a gentle kiss to his knuckles. The intimacy of the gesture sent a pleasant shiver through him. "I'm grateful for that," she murmured. He pulled her closer, voice hushed. "I love you," he found himself saying, the words tumbling out before he could overthink. They felt right, a culmination of all they'd been through. A flash of raw emotion crossed her features. Tears welled at the corners of her eyes, reflecting the faint glow of her cheeks. She slid her hands up to cup his face. "I love you too, Valen," she whispered, voice trembling with honesty. "I never thought I'd say that to a human, but with you, My heart is sure. He bent, catching her lips in a slow, deep kiss that sealed their unspoken promise. The corridor around them faded, leaving only the warmth of her body against his and the softness of her scaled skin beneath his fingertips. When they parted, both were breathless, hearts drumming. Let's keep making a life here, he said, voice rough with feeling. Adventuring when we want, helping your people rebuild, forging new ties. There's a whole galaxy out there, but I'd rather explore it with you than alone. She traced a light pattern across his cheek. Then that's what we'll do. Starting with the scouting mission tomorrow, and beyond. He nodded, a grin forming. Tomorrow and beyond. Holding hands, they continued down the corridor to their quarters, ready to face whatever challenges the stars would bring. The hum of life around them felt hopeful, a community rising from the ashes, a bond that transcended species. In the quiet glow of the asteroid's heart, they'd found each other, an unexpected love that burned brighter than any corporate cruelty, shining defiantly against the darkness of the void. And as they drifted off to sleep in each other's arms, they knew their story was only beginning.